Hello everybody, GGC Anime here, and today we are going to be reviewing Overlord Season 3. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into this. So, what is the story of Overlord Season 3? Well, taking place after Season 2, we kind of build up to the events of the people of Karn Village, I believe it's called, where we decide to revisit them and see how much they've grown. And that's where the main story starts. We just start at Karn Village and we get to see the developments of the characters like Enri and Nefaria, who are, living their lives here in this village. And we just kind of follow that for a bit before the story really develops. And that was a terrible description, but we're just going to roll with it. So, yeah, that's where the season starts. So, some spoiler-free thoughts. It's not the worst season I've ever seen of a TV show. It's just, when I watched this the first time, I remembered almost nothing from it. Like, I remember watching it a while ago, and yet, unlike the other seasons where I at least have parts of it I fully remembered well, there's only like one or two things I remember from this season. Pretty much everything else was a complete blank slate. And part of me knows why, and another part of me doesn't, because I actually really enjoyed the start of this. Like, the first 1 to 8 episodes or so, I really had a good time with. Like, for the most of the story, I had a great time with the story. It was very interesting and very intriguing, and I was having an awesome time. Then we got to the final storyline where it's stuff I won't go over right now, might go into the spoiler section about, where there's the parts of it that are just so distracting that I just can't take the story seriously. And I feel like I should be caring, but I'm not. But yeah, we'll get over that in the spoiler section. Talking about some characters for a bit, Ainz is still a lot of fun in this season, as is the rest of the cast. Although I do kind of wish that we got a bit more on Sebes, who was the big focus, one of the big focuses at least, in Season 2. He's just completely sidelined in this season. He has a bit at the beginning, and then after that he's just there, and he doesn't do anything else, and I really am a bit upset at that because he was one of the best parts of Season 2. There were still moments in this that I had a good time. I thought the introduction of the character Jerkniv, who, while is kind of mixed at times for me, he actually is a really interesting character and how he's handled, since I do kind of want to see more of him, since, stuff then the spoiler section I can go about. But overall, he's not a bad character. I think he's a fine character. So, yeah, I'm finding this really hard not to spoil anything, so we're just going to hop into the spoiler section. Here is a timestamp to when the spoiler section will conclude. If you have seen Overlord Season 3, I'd recommend sticking around, but if you haven't, I'd recommend skipping so that way you don't get spoiled. But again, if you have seen it, I'd recommend sticking around to hear my thoughts. So, yeah, I'm going to count up to 5, and we're going to enter the spoiler section. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so, going back to that quickly, Jerkniv. He's an interesting character because of the fact that he likes to think that he's cunning, and he is quite cunning in the human area, since he's one of the few rare, very insightful and smart humans. He's nothing before people like Demiurge, who just are immediately able to predict anything he's going to say, and I still found him to be a very interesting character, and I do want to see more of him. Whereas he wasn't always super interesting for the most part, I thought he was a very interesting character, and yeah. One of the more interesting aspects of this season, though, and something that definitely affected me the most, has got to be how Ainz does things in this season of Overlord. In previous seasons, he would always do things that sometimes were cruel, but for the most part, they were for a greater cause. But in this one, he's pretty much just a villain. He acts like a villain so much during this season, and I honestly really like that. Seeing how, when they were going against an army that Ainz recently had connections with, because Gazif was one of the knights there. He had connections there. But even so, he still wasn't afraid to massacre a lot of innocent people. And he definitely acted a lot more like a villain than he had in previous seasons, where he would do evil things, but for the most part, they were to people who he saw as actually evil. And seeing him actually do more villainous things this season was kind of refreshing, especially since it ended with him actually becoming a ruler, and I'm very curious to see where that goes. This is the final season I've actually watched of Overlord. I haven't seen Season 4 yet, so that'll be a new experience. Overall, I think there were some very solid moments. Although, as I mentioned earlier, there is one thing that kind of ruins the last storyline, and that is the awful CGI. In previous seasons, as well as other TV shows, I could excuse CGI that looked bad because they only used it scarcely. There wasn't that much to think, oh, this CGI is the worst thing you could possibly see. But in this season, they use that CGI way too much. Like, holy crap. I have never seen someone use this much awful CGI in a season of a TV show. It is abysmal. Like, there's this first storyline with Henry and how she blows the goblin horn and spawns in a bunch of goblins, like a whole army of goblins. And it is so disgusting to look at. Like, I have never been that disturbed looking at a CGI army in such a long time. It is the first time in a long time I have seen a CGI army and thought, oh, that's disgusting. Though that happened earlier in the season. The CGI I'm talking about now is the final battle where Ainz summons a bunch of young, I think they're called the Dark Young, that are going around trampling people, and they just look like weird goat things. Like, I saw how they looked in like the poster art, and they looked awesome in the poster art, but then you have them in the actual anime and they just look so weird, just really weird. There are still moments in it that are impactful, but they're kind of outweighed by the awful CGI, and this is actually one of the few times I think I've actually fully complained about the CGI personally. Like, I am used to bad CGI in anime. I've seen it many a time, and most of the time I could ignore it. But this is one of those rare cases where it was pretty much impossible to ignore. They overused it, and it looked so bad. It looked so bad. In terms of story, there are some moments that are a bit upsetting but understandable, such as the introduction of this group of adventurers, or workers as they call them, called Foresight, who went into the tomb of Nazarick along with a bunch of other workers who were trying to see if there was some treasure in there they could sell for some money. And the sad part is, we actually got to know about these characters. We got to learn about them, who they were, what type of personalities they had, and because of that, it made it really hurt when they had to fight Ainz, because, well, yes, I was rooting for Ainz at times. This is one of those times where I kind of wanted them to live, especially the one character called Arch, or Archie, I don't actually know how it's pronounced, but she was a character that, honestly, I felt bad for. She was trying to go back to her sisters after this adventure. They were hoping they just get some money, then she would leave with her sisters. But then we learned, yeah, she's not coming back. She's not going back to her sisters. She dies in a very excruciating way with all of her body parts distributed throughout Nazarick. And it really hurts because we grew to enjoy these characters. Even if it was only like for an episode, I really felt like these guys were just very enjoyable to watch. And it makes me so sad that in the end, they all are in very bad positions. I'm pretty sure 2 of them were sent off to breeding experiments. One was going to be tested on, and then there's just the one I mentioned before, who was literally just killed, and her body parts were distributed throughout Nazarick. And overall, it really hurts. But I understand they were meant to show that Nazarick is powerful, or Nazarick, I'll just call it whatever. They wanted to show how powerful it was. Ainz wanted to get people to recognize it, and it worked. They got it recognized, and the season does end with them taking over Kingdom and ruling over it. And again, I do appreciate how much Ainz is more of a villain in this season. Is he a perfect villain? No, he definitely has some flaws here and there. But I did have a pretty decent time. Was it as good as Season 2? Not really. I still think Season 2 was a lot more enjoyable, and there were a lot more moments where I got into it. As I mentioned before, when the season carried on, I slowly got kind of bored with this season. It wasn't bad, but it definitely could have been better, and I honestly wish I could enjoy it more. And as for some parts, I actually had a good time. The first 2 storylines, even though I do feel bad for the adventurer group, I think they're called Foresight. I do feel bad for them, but their storyline was fairly enjoyable, as well as the first storyline with Henry and how she and the goblins grew and improved themselves, and that was really interesting. Overall, the storylines were pretty solid, except the last one, which isn't bad, but it definitely could have been better, and I still feel so bad for Gazif. Gazif dies, and in the end, he tries to fight Ainz, and just like, I challenge you to a duel. I'm sure I can at least survive for a few seconds, and then Ainz just time stops, and after using the time stop power, just insta-kills Gazif, and it feels so bad. At least for me, it feels like a really bad feeling, because he was a character I really wanted to see more of. He was such a good support for Brain, as well as Climb, who, honestly, I like them, but Gazif was the thing that really tied them together and made me like their characters. So, yeah, Climb is still an interesting character, but he doesn't really do much in this season, so we'll see where he goes maybe in the future. I don't know. Again, I haven't seen Season 4 yet, so we'll find out when we get to Season 4. Overall, I didn't hate this season. It's not the worst thing ever. I definitely had a decent time with it, but it's really hard to say. I guess you could say it was like on the same level of enjoyment for me as Season 1. Maybe a little bit less, because while I didn't hate it, there were times where I was bored. I don't think it was most of the time. For the most part, I was entertained, but it did take some time for me to fully get into the show. And yeah, maybe it's better than Season 1, maybe it's not. Just, it doesn't really stand out too much, in my opinion. So yeah. We're at the conclusion of this video, and what are my final thoughts? It's a decent season. It's not the best thing ever. It could have been better in a lot of areas, but overall, I didn't have a bad time. I still enjoyed seeing Ainz do all of these cool, badass things. Like, it was still super cool and awesome, but overall, it definitely could have been a lot better. And I hope that Season 4, which is, again, it's the only season I haven't seen yet, does have a lot of more to show for it, and I look forward to watching that in the near future. So, yeah, this season, I'd probably have to give it a 7 out of 10. It's not a horrible season, but it could have been better. I was still entertained for the most part, and that's all I have to say. So, yeah. Thank you all for watching. If you're new to the JGC Anime channel, don't forget to subscribe. I always look for new anime fans to the channel, and I will see you all around. Peace!